This video is dedicated to the history of the Carousel and Playland Pier from 1941 until its return in 2011. 1942 to late 1970s, the small amusement park on the banks of Lake Coeur d'Alene provided many fond memories for thousands of kids of all ages. In 1941, work begins on the pier. Some 20,000 yards of earth and 10,000 yards of riprap will be used for the fill of the pier to be constructed on the waterfront adjacent to the city park. Routine matters taken up by Chamber today. Matters of interest occupied the Coeur d'Alene Chamber of Commerce at its regular The Right. Monday noon luncheon at the Silver Grill Cafe. Carl Gridley, Vice President, was in charge of the meeting in the absence of Robert and Elder Council President. Mayor K. Cole requested that city officials have prepared papers for the proposal of leasing new acquired grounds adjoining the GN Depot at the east end of the city park to W. Earl Summers, who plans to construct 140 times 300 feet amusement pier. The mayor said the city council will act on the lease at the meeting tonight. Under the plan, a 15-year lease would be granted, with the option of Mr. Summers to extend it to 10 years more. Coeur d'Alene on the municipal pier being built on the lakefront facing the city park, which will be 140 foot times 300 feet, which will rest the latest types of amusement attractions. The present bathing beach to be improved and floating docks to surround the water area, which will accommodate new swimming pool equipment. The third part of the development will include a public golf course to be located south of No. 10 Highway and east of the Northwest Boulevard, Gibbs Bypass. The Coeur d'Alene Lakeside Development Company planned to finance this development by issuing 6% interest-bearing debentures of a par value of $10, transferable at the pleasure of the holder into common stock of the company. These debentures mature in 1956. Capitalization of the company consists of 3,800 debentures of $10 each amounting to $38,000 and 6,000 shares of common stock at $10 each amounting to $60,000. Present officers of the company are W. Earl Summers, Oscar W. Nelson, Carl Gridley, T.H. Dingle, Harold V. Wilson, C. Hagedorn. Coeur d'Alene Lakeside Development Company. Tuesday morning, January 7, 1941. Spokesman review. Playtime Pier gets city okay. Waterfront amusement project given 15-year lease ready in 1942. Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, Jan 6, culminating a year of preparatory work. The city administration tonight voted to grant W. Earl Summers a 15-year lease on an amusement pier to be constructed on the waterfront adjacent to the city park. The contract also gives Summers an option for an additional 10 years. At the public forum on the proposed lease, Alfred Swanson, stating that the citizens were not in favor of the pier, protested against the city authorizing continuance of the project. Others entered into a discussion on clauses of the lease, which has been modified to protect the city's interests. The Spokesman review, Spokane, Washington. Sunday morning, February 2, 1941. Proposed $75,000 amusement pier to be constructed at Coeur d'Alene Pier. This is an artist's conception of the municipal amusement pier to be built at the lakeside of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Summers said he expected most of the stockholders will be local residents. A company, the Coeur d'Alene Lakeside Development Corporation, expects to take a 25-year lease, with the city to retain ownership of the project. The Coeur d'Alene Lakeside Development Company, which was formed by Coeur d'Alene men, planned to capitalize Coeur d'Alene's many scenic advantages and to develop the city as an amusement and recreational center of this vast Pacific Northwest area. March 14, 1941. Recreational development. The citizens of Coeur d'Alene, in planning ceremonies Sunday to which they have invited the people of Spokane and the Inland Empire, are not overemphasizing to this region of the recreational development project to be dedicated on that occasion. Coeur d'Alene Lake has been a favorite resort for residents of Spokane and the Inland Empire, and building such new recreational facilities as the projected $75,000 municipal pier and an ample yacht basin capable of berthing 500 pleasure boats will make of Coeur d'Alene a more popular recreational center than ever. A homecoming movement began after a Coeur d'Alene resident spotted the restored Carousel in a shopping mall in Virginia in the late 1990s. It was traced back to the Perron family in Oregon, and a reunion looked to be in the cards. Dwayne's wife, Carol Perron, who bought the Carousel in the late 1970s, is from Coeur d'Alene and had worked at Playland Pier. The would-be deal required a $150,000 a year lease for the machine, while being housed in a building southeast of the Museum of North Idaho. It fell through, or never really got off the ground. A citizens' committee had been formed to explore it, but newspaper articles said financial and logistical problems stood in the way. We were surprised that Coeur d'Alene, with the type of resources it has, with the type of beauty it has, couldn't find a way to bring it home, Dwayne Perron said. This time it doesn't matter where it goes, so long if it's in Coeur d'Alene, he said. The machine, he said, could be worth around $500,000. If the carousel doesn't end up in North Idaho, it would likely go to an auction house in New York. The parents are building a new museum, and Coeur d'Alene's carousel isn't making the cut there, so it needs to go. But the city doesn't have room in its budget. It would take outside help to get it, and put a roof over its head, officials said. The building needed to protect the carousel could prevent the carousel from being part of McEwen Field project as well, Blom said. We're not looking at buildings, per se, so I don't know if it could fit, she said. Supporter Richard LaFrancis said that shouldn't stop the community from exploring all of its options. He points to Spokane's 1909 Louvre Carousel as an example of a successful tourist attraction and economic engine. The 60-horse machine gives 300,000 rides per year. LaFrancis was on board with bringing the carousel back 10 years ago, and is spearheading the campaign now. He said the historical tourist attraction fits in with the downtown's redeveloped core. He's collecting signatures he plans to present to the McEwen Field open house January 6th. It's right here, LaFrancis said. This time it doesn't matter where it goes, so long if it's in Coeur d'Alene, he said. The machine, he said, could be worth around $500,000. If the carousel doesn't end up in North Idaho, it would likely go to an auction house in New York. The parents are building a new museum, and Coeur d'Alene's carousel isn't making the cut there, so it needs to go. But the city doesn't have room in its budget. It would take outside help to get it, and put a roof over its head, officials said. The building needed to protect the carousel could prevent the carousel from being part of McEwen Field project as well, Blom said. We're not looking at buildings, per se, so I don't know if it could fit, she said. Supporter Richard LaFrancis said that shouldn't stop the community from exploring all of its options. He points to Spokane's 1909 Louvre Carousel as an example of a successful tourist attraction and economic engine. The 60-horse machine gives 300,000 rides per year. LaFrancis was on board with bringing the carousel back 10 years ago, and is spearheading the campaign now. He said the historical tourist attraction fits in with the downtown's redeveloped core. From Property Group dated November 16, 1998. Dear Mr. Perron, I received a call today from Mr. Richard LaFrancis of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. He is on Coeur d'Alene's Downtown Restoration Committee and they are interested in locating the historic carousel that used to be at Virginia Center Commons, as Coeur d'Alene was apparently the original home of the carousel. He would greatly appreciate a response from you. Signed Pam Garrett. Virginia Center Commons. Letter dated December 29, 1998 from Nancy Gilbertson. Dear Mr. LaFrancis, I am writing to you following correspondence we received from Pam Garrett with Virginia Center Commons. I understand that you are interested in information about historic carousels, Inc. and specifically, the antique carousel that once resided in Coeur d'Alene. I am enclosing some information about our company, statistics about the carousel and a recent photo of the machine. The 75-year-old Spillman Engineering Carousel has spent most of its life in the Pacific Northwest. For many years, it ran at the now-defunct Playland Pier overlooking Coeur d'Alene Lake. It was in storage for several years and resurfaced at auction in Puyallup, Washington in 1987. At this time, it was purchased by Dwayne and Carol Perron, the current officers and owners of Historic Carousels, Inc. After coming out of retirement, the carousel has participated in events, movies, and has been run under TL1E management of Historic Carousels Incorporated. The carousel most recently lived in Virginia Center Commons in Glen Allen, Virginia. Historic Carousels, Inc. has had the carousel for over 10 years and we are actively searching for a permanent home for this unique and beautiful antique machine. I believe that you will appreciate the wonder of this piece of art. If I can be of any assistance or if I can answer any questions that you may have, please do not hesitate to contact me. It was barely a week before Christmas when the calls and emails came into Dawn and I about the return of the Playland Pier Carousel to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. They were all from Richard LaFrancis, who was trying once again, after nearly a dozen years, to bring back the little 1922 Spillman Engineering Carousel that had once entertained the children of the resort town 35 miles from Spokane, Washington. Playland Pier, a small amusement park on the banks of Lake Coeur d'Alene, had been a bright entertainment spot on the popular beach. It had created fond memories for almost everyone in the area who was a child in the late 40s through the mid-1970s. At that time, Coeur d'Alene was known for its lumber mills, mining, and the pristine views of one of the most picturesque and largest lakes of northern Idaho. The amusement park employed the usual fare, teenagers who vied for the chance of summer employment at the center of fun on the busy beach. One of those teenagers would become so sentimental about her summer spent selling pop and hot dogs and working on the merry-go-round that she and her husband would amass one of the largest carousel collections in the country, perhaps the world. Her dream was to see this first carousel in her life to spin again on those same sandy beaches of her youth. Her name was Carol Perron. An earlier attempt to return it back home had sparked to life in the late 1990s, but to no avail. LaFrancis luckily had not forgotten the positive response of the community who agreed on its return. The area has changed dramatically in the last 30 years. Was to call the Coeur d'Alene Press, the local newspaper, and relate to them his idea of trying once more to bring the carousel back to Coeur d'Alene. The story was posted on Christmas Eve, December 24, 2010. Unbeknownst to any of us, there was a gentleman and his wife, John and Pat Foote, who were in Coeur d'Alene buying a summer residence that overlooked the beach and the lake where the merry-go-round had operated. Upon reading the story, John was immediately taken back to his own teenage years of working at Wonderland, a small amusement park in Billings, Montana owned by his parents during the same period of time. John picked up the phone and called LaFrancis on Christmas Day. LaFrancis helped put Foote in contact with the Perrons after the carousel-collecting Perrons expressed their desire to return the machine to Coeur d'Alene, and Foote said he wanted to make that happen. Now it's here, although only one of the 20 horses made it from the storage until to its old lakeside hangout spot Monday afternoon, where the Perrons accepted the rest of the payment for the deal. "I'm just glad it got done and it's coming back," Carol Perron said. And that they wanted it back. February, barely 2 months after these first phone calls were made, and following a lot of emails and press releases, the check for the carousel was written at the Pappy Boyington Veterans Museum. Dawn and I were there as the local volunteers unloaded the carousel in Idaho. Carol and Dwayne Perron were there, armed with clippings and photos of their trek to not only restore but to operate the little merry-go-round as well as enjoy its final road trip home. John and Pat Foote have not only gifted the carousel to the Coeur d'Alene community, but have provided funds to facilitate its move, setup and training needed to make it spin again on the banks of the pristine lake. Their only stipulation: her name was Carol Perron. An earlier attempt to return it back home had sparked to life in the late 1990s, but to no avail. LaFrancis luckily had not forgotten the positive response of the community who agreed on its return. The area has changed dramatically in the last 30 years. The main attraction of the lake was now the focal point of economic revitalization with a 4-star resort hotel, condominiums overlooking the lake, award-winning golf courses, and winter skiing close by, a true modern year-round resort town. LaFrancis' first call was to Don Largent, who handles the group bookings for the Spokane 1909 Luft Carousel. LaFrancis was researching Spokane's carousel operations, marketing, and the history of the popular antique ride in the heart of the downtown area. His next call was to me for even more information. I told him I knew of the desire of the Perrons to return it back home to Coeur d'Alene and had attended the public hearings on the proposal in 1999. I told him of the NCA Technical Conference in 2004 when attendees as well as myself had ridden it while it was on display at the Willamette Center in Oregon. At that time it was part of a spectacular display from the International Carousel Museum's collection owned by the Perrons. I assured him I and the NCA would help him in any way we could to make the dream come true. I then began to gather more information to send along to him and finish those cookies before Christmas. LaFrancis' next action was to call the Coeur d'Alene Press, the local newspaper, and relate to them his idea of trying once more to bring the carousel back to Coeur d'Alene. The story was posted on Christmas Eve, December 24, 2010. Unbeknownst to any of us, there was a gentleman and his wife, John and Pat Foote, who were in Coeur d'Alene buying a summer residence that overlooked the beach and the lake where the merry-go-round had operated. Upon reading the story, John was immediately taken back to his own teenage years of working at Wonderland, a small amusement park in Billings, Montana owned by his parents during the same period of time. John picked up the phone and called LaFrancis on Christmas Day. By February, barely 2 months after these first phone calls were made, and following a lot of emails and press releases, the check for the carousel was written at the Pappy Boyington Fide Museum. Dawn and I were there as the local volunteers unloaded the carousel in Idaho. Carol and Dwayne Perrone were there, armed with clippings and photos of their trek to not only restore but to operate the little merry-go-round as well as enjoy its final road trip home. John and Pat Foote have not only gifted the carousel to the Coeur d'Alene community, but have provided funds to facilitate its move, setup and training needed to make it spin again on the banks of the pristine lake. Their only stipulation is that the community must provide it with a building that places no burden upon the taxpayers. The community has agreed that they are up to the challenge. This section notes and interviews. Notes from the Summers family. Earl Summers was the manager for the Riley Candy Company in Spokane, Washington, but he had bigger aspirations. Notes from the Summers family. Earl Summers was the manager for the Riley Candy Company in Spokane, Washington, but he had bigger aspirations. He bought the carousel before 1932 and took it around to different state fairs and events. The picture of the carousel in Spokane was 1933 and they were celebrating Spokane's 50th anniversary as a city. My mom also worked at Riley Candy Company and wrote in her diary about going up to Priest River for River Days to help sell tickets to ride on the carousel. John Mueller wrote about Playland Pier in his book. Private Park, Public Park: A Story of Coeur d'Alene and its First Park. John Mueller wrote about Playland Pier in his book. Private Park, Public Park: A Story of Coeur d'Alene and its First Park. Oral history from Bill Jor on Playland Pier. Beginning in 1951, Bill Jort worked Summers his last 3 years of high school. Earl Summers was the owner. Bill worked on rides: merry-go-round, Ferris wheel, Dodgem cars, train, lupoplane, heyday, platform of metal sheeting with 2-seater cars on it, one section pinned down. Cars ran in circles on sloped platform, up and down, and the swings over the lake. Park opened after the war. Bill's dad, Andy, ran the merry-go-round. On the 4th it never stopped, went 2 to 3 rounds then slowed to crawl while unloaded and others got on. Long lines on Ferris wheel were tricky because the weight had to be balanced. When obese people got on it would cause cables to slip when they reached the top. Prices, 18-25 cents per ride. Rides set on gravel. Arcade games. Movie, flip, cards, football, metal ball and characters with one mobile leg to kick, fortune teller in glass, shooting gallery, air rifles with BBs at ducks. Souvenirs. Soda fountain that sold cotton candy, hamburgers, hot dogs, and sodas. Cotton candy 15 and 20 cents. Lots of sailors and their girls. Bathhouse, dressing rooms, rental suits and towels, check-in clothes and valuables had rubber tag on wrist for retrieval. 3rd and 4th of July drew the biggest crowds. On the 3rd there was a kiddie parade that ended at the pier and kids got a free ticket for merry-go-round. On the 4th of July the median section was filled with other vendor booths. Milk bottles, ring the bottle, rented space to vendors for these all the way down Sherman, second to Playland Pier. Did this in the summers when Farragut was going strong too. Never rented the amusement area. City park events, baseball, and picnics drew people to the pier. The park had a bandstand. Earl Summers lived between Dodgem cars and arcade building in Little House hooked on the arcade. Sold the park to Ray Barber in the 70s. Oral interview with Rosie Rosenland. Worked for Summers, reconditioned the machines from 1951 to 1952 to fix rides. Worked before went into service, 1945 to 1947, Summers in high school. Earl originally owned Moving Carnival. Axel Rosenland, Rosie's dad, was the mayor, had an agreement with the city to make the Playland Pier permanent. Made during the war for the soldiers' entertainment. City probably paid for the fill, volunteer fill from community. Foote obituary. It's too bad John Foote did not see his vision come to life. Foote, 69, formerly of Billings, Montana, passed away Saturday, February 22, 2014, at his home in Big Fork, Montana with his wife and daughter by his side. He was born November 13, 1944 in Missoula, Montana to Don C. and Stella Foote. John was raised in Billings. He married Pat in 1966 and their daughter Anne Renee was born in Missoula in 1967. After John's graduation from the University of Montana, they moved to Los Angeles, California. Their son Jason was born in 1970. After 5 years in Los Angeles working for Union Carbide and Security Pacific Bank, the family returned to Billings where John managed Foote Enterprises and developed the Billings Commerce Center. John and his mother, Stella, owned Pompey's Pillar National Landmark. John was a past president of the Lewis and Clark Trail Heritage Foundation. John and Pat enjoyed their travels, hobbies and building homes in Sedona, Arizona, Jackson Hole, WI, Scottsdale, Arizona and Big Fork, Montana. John will be missed by his family and all of his wonderful friends. He left us entirely too quickly. Rest in peace, John. John is survived by his wife of 47 years, Pat of Big Fork, Montana, daughter Anne Renee Potts of El Dorado Hills, CA, son Jason Foote of Sahuarita, Arizona, 3 grandchildren, Sierra and Brittany Potts and Jace Foote.